As record rates of inflation persist, high costs continue to annoy shoppers at the grocery store. In June 2021 and June 2022, food costs increased by 10.4% based on the most recent Consumer Prices Index report. Some people are being forced by high pricing to make unpleasant choices, such as using food banks for the very first time. Some claim they don't meet all of their nutritional requirements, such as eating enough protein, since it's just too pricey. Unfortunately, the cause of the skyrocketing prices is not a straightforward issue, and economists predict it will be some time before consumers experience relief. This video is going to be about the global food crisis while answering the following questions. What are the major reasons for increasing food prices? What are the consequences people are facing due to increasing food prices? What should governments do to control it? Domestically and internationally, issues raising food prices. Food costs are increasing for a number of reasons, including pandemic unpredictability. Almost every step of the food chain, including production, processing, and sale, has been impacted by the pandemic. The impact of those changes on the supply chain of food is still present today. Lockdowns prevented individuals from eating at home, which caused manufacturers who supply restaurants to lose a significant portion of their clientele, while grocery stores experienced a sharp rise in demand. In those early months, many food producers tried to adapt their businesses to accommodate grocery customers. Labor turnover, expenditures to safeguard products from contamination, and additional worker training expenses all contributed to an increase in the cost of food manufacturing. And while the COVID virus may no longer be a major concern in many Western countries, it's still causing problems in China, the world's greatest exporter of products, which means additional nations will undoubtedly be affected. Although less severe than the original pandemic lockdowns, the most recent round of lockdowns in China has resulted in a fall in export growth from the nation. This has put extra strain on the worldwide supply chain. Moreover, in areas around Shanghai, which is home to one of the biggest ports in the world, lockdowns are reportedly beginning again. These might again interfere with the nation's export capacity, further upsetting the worldwide supply chain. The Ukraine War. Analysts predicted that food prices would be impacted early on in the conflict in Ukraine. These expectations were realized. Some of the world's biggest wheat producers are Russia and Ukraine, which together account for 30% of all wheat exports. However, the fighting has made it difficult for Ukraine to keep exporting wheat. The war has destroyed both its agricultural output and export capacity. From a year ago, its cargo shipments have dropped 92%. In addition, there is a global wheat crisis due to Ukraine's inability to perform its function as a significant producer of wheat. As a result, wheat prices rise due to a lack of supply, increasing the cost of processing essential constituents like flour and starch. To offset their rising production expenses, food manufacturers must raise the price they charge consumers. Rising energy costs. Due to the sanctions imposed by numerous Western nations on Russian oil and gas, electricity prices have also surged. The highest 12-month increase in energy prices since 1980 occurred between June 2021 and June 2022, rising 41.6%. Energy costs have risen as a result of the conflict in Ukraine. Russian oil import restrictions in Western nations have caused gas prices to skyrocket. The pandemic-induced spike in food production and shipping costs is being made worse by rising oil prices. Additional factors increasing food prices. In the worst-case scenario, according to the United Nations, food prices will increase by an additional 8.5% by 2027. These higher prices are a result of more expensive fertilizers, some of which have increased by 300% since September of 2020. Megan Kaiser, a farmer director for the United Soybean Board and owner of Kaiser Family Farms, stated, "Last year, fertilizer was around $270 per ton, and it's now over $1,400 per ton. It's scary. It turns my stomach a little bit to think about the amount of risk that our family farm is taking right now." Farmers are being compelled to pass part of those expenses onto consumers, which raises the cost of groceries. In addition, crops require fertilizer to grow. Without fertilizer, plants might not receive the nutrition required to produce the yields required to satisfy world demand. Without fertilizer, the world's population would only be able to be fed by around half, claims the International Fertilizer Association. The farmers are making an effort to adapt to this new standard. According to data from the US Department of Agriculture, farmers indicated they would be planting more soybeans in spring 2022, or a record 91 million acres of the legumes. That might be the case since legumes don't grow as well with fertilizers as maize. Price increases for the fertilizer began in 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine. It's amazing how dependent the world is on fertilizers from the region that we're talking about, Russia and Ukraine, said Johanna Mendelssohn-Forman, a professor at American University's School of International Service. At least 28% of the world's exports of fertilizers, including those based on nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, come from this region. Costs for natural gas are another aspect contributing to price increases. This is due to the fact that one of the ways fertilizers might affect climate change is because they are produced using fossil fuels. Consequences. Particularly in emerging economies where food consumes a bigger portion of family budgets than in wealthy nations, a fast increase in food prices can have a substantial impact on household consumption and nutrition. However, compared to the previous food price crisis in 2007 to 2008, the present price increase has had less of an impact on poverty. Compared to the 75 million plunged into extreme poverty in the 2007 to 2008 crisis, 44 million more individuals since last June have been affected by the present crisis. Restricted access to domestic prices. The prices of important stable commodities like maize and sorghum decreased as a result of successful harvests in so many African economies. On the other hand, the moderate price hikes for rice, a significant staple grain in Asia, have prevented hunger for around 5 million people. However, smaller developing nations are still more susceptible to swings in prices than larger ones. Makeup of the increase. While food prices are at the highest levels ever, sugar and oils have witnessed the biggest rises, whereas cereals were at the forefront of the price surge in 2007 to 2008. Although prices began at a higher level and finished nearly where they were at the height of 2008, Martin stated that prices had not climbed as much as during the 2008 food price crisis. Modern economies. While food costs are a significant factor driving inflation in underdeveloped nations, their influence is less pronounced in affluent economies. For example, less than 20% of food's retail price in the United States is attributable to farm gate prices, which highlights how much processing, marketing, and cost of transportation contribute to the price of food as a whole. The need for a global response to rising food costs. Boost biofuels regulations. Governments should abolish excessive blending quotas and biofuel subsidies, such as the mandate to put a particular amount of ethanol in gasoline. In addition, political decision makers should take into account a number of other steps, such as decreasing or halting the use of grain and oilseeds for biofuels or freezing biofuel output at existing levels. Support must also be given to the research of bioenergy technologies that are independent of food crops. A ban on grain-based biofuels would immediately allow for the use of these products as food. This action may lower maize prices by around 20% globally, which will then result in a 10% drop in wheat prices. Improve the food aid. Governments of donor nations must expand their assistance for the food and nutritional security of the poor. The most vulnerable, especially children, should receive priority. Stop export restrictions. A nation may lessen its risks of food shortages in the short term by enacting policies like export restrictions on agricultural products, high export tariffs, and price controls. These actions, however, are likely to be counterproductive by shrinking and escalating the volatility of the global market. Export restrictions hurt commercial partners who depend on imports. For instance, India's export limitations on rice have a negative impact on Bangladeshi customers and reduce the incentive for rice farmers in India to make investments in their businesses. Price limits lessen farmers' incentives to increase their food production. On the other hand, the removal of export restrictions would cut price levels by up to 30%, stabilize grain price swings, and improve the effectiveness of agricultural output. That's all there is for today. Leave us a comment of your thoughts on the global food crisis. Also, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to our channel if you enjoyed the video, and click the notification bell to never miss our videos. Stay tuned.